Today we're diving into a topic that's as nostalgic as it gets, the top 6 games with the best graphics for the Atari Jaguar console. While the Jaguar might not have been the biggest commercial success when it was released back in the 90s, there's no denying it produced some memorable games with killer visuals for its time.
Can you repeat the question? Jaguar!
The Atari Jaguar was released in the US in November of 1993 and featured a unique systems architecture that was way ahead of its competitors at the time. It combined 5 different processors on board 3 separate chips, giving it advanced graphics rendering and sound capabilities. In addition to having a Motorola 68000 CPU like the Sega Genesis, it also came with all guns blazing, offering custom graphics hardware in the form of dual 32-bit co-processors. These chips worked in tandem with one affectionately known as Tom, a GPU that was designated to handle both 2D sprites and 3D graphics, that was accompanied by Jerry, a digital signal processor that's responsible for handling audio and some video processing tasks. The powerhouse combo of these complementary chips allowed the Jaguar to render high-quality visuals at impressive speeds for its time. It was also able to produce some pretty impressive music and crystal clear sound effects due to its 16-bit stereo CD quality sound. The graphics processor also featured an onboard blitter chip, which played a key role in accelerating graphics and improving the performance of 2D and 3D rendering. The blitter was a dedicated hardware component designed to handle the transfer and manipulation of image data, specifically for drawing pixels, bitmaps, and textures. It was also one of the first systems to support advanced features like alpha blending and transparency effects, which contributed to more realistic graphics. These combined features equipped the Jaguar with the ability to handle complex 3D graphics, something that was not yet commonplace in other home consoles. However, the Jaguar's complex hardware architecture also presented significant challenges to game programming. The system's complexity and multi-chip architecture was difficult to program for, and some developers struggled to unlock the full potential of the hardware. Despite those challenges, the games I'll show you today showcase the Jaguar's capabilities and provide a great illustration of the console's power in its day. It's important to remember that the Jaguar was released in the United States way back in 1993, a full year before the Sega Saturn was released in '94, and almost 2 years before the PlayStation came out in 1995. So let's be sure to keep this in mind to ensure that we have an accurate point of reference and context. With that being said, let's take a closer look at 6 standout games that got the most out of the hardware in this Retro Gaming Boss retrospective of the best graphics on the Atari Jaguar. So let's begin with viewing Rayman, a game that's not only charming, but is visually stunning even to this day. The hand-drawn character animations are fluid, and the environments are filled with vibrant colors and detailed backgrounds. The platforming is tight, but it's the beautiful art style and creative character designs that make this one shine on the Atari Jaguar. Rayman's world is magical, and it really stands out as one of the most visually striking platformers of the 90s. I'm gonna let the graphics in this game speak for themselves. Enjoy the following Jaguar eye candy. Next, we enter into the web in the brilliant Tempest 2000. This absolute masterpiece from Jeff Minter was released in 1994. Its psychedelic and trippy visuals were a perfect backdrop for the fast-paced arcade-style action. This game seamlessly demonstrates several of the Atari Jaguar's graphics rendering capabilities in a way that was so fun to experience. The colorful graphics, transparencies, and intense particle effects really bring this one to life and make the gameplay pop on the screen. It's a psychedelic head rush, hard to match, even by today's standards. Tempest 2000 used a form of vector graphics with Garo shading that allowed for smooth, real-time rotations and scaling of geometric shapes, creating a vibrant and surreal visual experience. The game's dynamic environments with its swirling neon colors exploited the Jaguar's hardware to deliver a visually captivating experience that was far ahead of its time. In addition to the hardware advantages of the Jaguar, the software optimizations in Tempest 2000 played a crucial role in achieving its visual excellence. The game's engine was specifically designed to take full advantage of the Jaguar's parallel processing, allowing it to handle multiple layers of visual effects without compromising performance. Special effects like lighting, color gradients, and the movement of enemies and projectiles were handled in real time, creating a truly dynamic and immersive experience. Coupled with a driving electronic soundtrack, the game's visuals were not only technically advanced, but also deeply integrated into the gameplay, producing a sensory experience that combined sight and sound in a way that had never been seen before in the gaming industry. Kudos and thank you to Jeff Minter and Atari for bringing this masterpiece into existence for us retro gamers to cherish. Our next title is the popular Alien vs. Predator. This one takes the visuals to a whole other level. The dark, atmospheric environments are enhanced by detailed textures, shadows, and creepy lighting that made it one of the best-looking games on the Jaguar. Whether you're stalking your prey as an alien, battling as a predator, or fighting them all in a battle royal for survival as the lone colonial marine, the sense of dread and immersion created by the graphics is second to none. The alien-infested halls and the intense combat make every moment feel like a survival horror masterpiece. The game took full advantage of the console's custom processors to deliver detailed environments and featured digitized character models. The hardware allowed for realistic motion and fluid animations of the creatures, adding to the sense of tension and danger. Compare that with the cartoony, animation-style pixel graphics seen in Doom that was released on the PC not much earlier, and you can see how the Jaguar's capabilities were crucial for creating the claustrophobic, atmospheric feel of the alien-infested setting. The Jaguar's advanced graphical effects were particularly important in the game's Predator campaign, with its cloaking technology and thermal vision adding a previously unseen layer in the gameplay experience. Let's see more of what makes this game so great. Next up is Super Burnout. If you're into racing games, this one will really get your adrenaline pumping. The game features some of the smoothest and high-speed racing visuals for the time, with huge and detailed sprites and slick environments that make you feel like you're right there on the track. The sense of breakneck speed is incredible due to the sharp, vibrant, and fluid graphics. It's a high-speed thrill ride that really shows off the Jaguar's 2D rendering power. The Jaguar's custom graphics chips, particularly the TOM chip, excelled at handling fast and detailed 2D sprite-based graphics. Super Burnout featured beautifully rendered motorcycles and the rush of the environment speeding by, while all maintaining a consistent and smooth frame rate even during high-speed races. One of the key advancements that made Super Burnout a visual standout was the implementation of dynamic, parallax scrolling, which created a sense of depth and immersion as players raced through the multiple layers of scenery. The game's backgrounds, such as roads and landscapes, would scroll at different speeds depending on the position in the scene, making the environment feel three-dimensional. While parallax scrolling was nothing new at the time, this game took it to new heights, with tons of huge super-scaling sprites, more detailed layers of background imagery that were really impressive. I mean, just look at that moon! All of these elements combined with fast, responsive gameplay showcase the Jaguar's potential for delivering visually impressive and high-performance 2D racing games, cementing Super Burnout as one of the most visually striking racing games of the early 90s.
Best time. 3 laps to go.
And coming in at number 5 is Iron Soldier. This one's for all you mech fans. You pilot a massive war robot stomping around in 3D cities that featured for the first time that I am aware of with destructible environments. The graphics, while seemingly simple by today's standards, were in fact highly advanced at the time, offering players the ability to strap into a giant stompy robot and navigate a fully rendered 3D open-world environment. The visuals in Iron Soldier for the Atari Jaguar were special due to their pioneering use of 3D polygon graphics to render large-scale environments and enemies in real time, which was a significant leap forward for console gaming. You have to remember at the same time, the Super Nintendo and Genesis were still in their heydays of 2D side-scrolling platformers. The open-world gameplay of Iron Soldier was another key feature that set the game apart. Players could freely navigate large, destructible 3D environments including cities and military bases. The Jaguar's hardware rendered these environments featuring massive skyscrapers, various buildings and vehicles that could all be interacted with in real time. The ability to destroy objects added a layer of depth and immersion that was unprecedented in many consoles of that era. The sense of power you felt while smashing an entire city block into thousands of tumbling chunks of debris and the explosions it caused was incredible. Even today, when you turn up the volume and have a full-on smashing spree, it's pretty cool watching the carnage explode around you. Let's see some more giant robot goodness. Our sixth and final entry is the standout port of the original Doom. The Jaguar's powerful chipset was a significant upgrade from other consoles of the era, and its hardware had the capability to render higher resolution textures and more detailed environments, which enhanced the overall visual fidelity of Doom. The Jaguar's advanced blitter chip really helped power the game's smoother performance and rendering speed compared to the other systems that struggled, especially with the more complex visual environments. The Jaguar's hardware-based scaling and rotation of sprites was also a technique that was especially helpful in making the gameplay feel more responsive and less choppy than the other platforms. When you compare Doom on the Jaguar to the 16-bit port on the Super Nintendo, the difference is night and day. The Jaguar port also benefited from a modified version of the Doom engine, optimizing it to run smoothly with more sophisticated visual effects than earlier ports. This included fine-tuning to accommodate the limited amount of RAM in the Jaguar, and also to boost the parallel processing to provide a more smooth and stable frame rate. With this combination of cutting-edge hardware and software enhancements, the Atari Jaguar version of Doom pushed the boundaries of the console graphics at its time, delivering a crisp and more refined, all-around, more technically impressive experience. Let's see some more for your retro enjoyment. Before we wrap things up, let's take a look at the honorable mention that didn't make the list, but still deserves some recognition for its fantastic graphics. Our runner-up has to be the remarkable adaptation of the arcade shoot-'em-up, Rayman. This game packed a huge punch with detailed, colorful graphics and intense gameplay, with smooth scrolling and tons of sprites on screen at any time. The visual effects, explosions, and chaotic projectile patterns are a real treat for the eyes, making it one of the more polished shoot-'em-ups available for any home console at the time. The game's vertical scrolling style benefited from the Jaguar's ability to handle large numbers of on-screen objects such as enemy ships, projectiles, and explosions without slowdown. The result was a visually stunning experience with vibrant, detailed sprite art that made each level visually engaging and a joy to play through. Rayman's advanced visual effects, such as multiple background layers and parallax scrolling, further enhanced the gameplay experience. Additionally, the game utilized vibrant explosions, particle effects, and a variety of color gradients that were rendered by the console's graphical power, creating a visually striking scene during intense battles. Let's check it out. And there you have it, folks, the top 6 games with the best graphics for the Atari Jaguar, plus an honorable mention. What do you think? Do you agree with this list? Are there any other games that you think deserve a spot? Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you enjoy the Atari Jaguar and its incredible graphics, then make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more feel-good retro gaming. Also be sure to share your favorite memories in the comments below. Alright everybody, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out, and I'll see you on the next one. Was the Atari Jaguar really a 64-bit console? It's a debate that's echoed through retro gaming forums and living rooms for decades. For anyone who was there, who saw the magazine ads or stood in the store staring at that sleek black box, the question carries a certain weight. It's more than just a technicality. It's about the promise of a new generation of graphics, the power we were told was in our hands, and the reality of what actually showed up on our television screens. The answer is not a simple yes or no. It's a journey into the heart of one of the most ambitious and misunderstood consoles ever made. Today we're going to settle this debate once and for all. We will deconstruct the Jaguar's architecture and examine the silicon at the core that brought it to life. We're going to look beyond the marketing hype
3D graphics blow my mind.
Did you hear that? We are blowing minds.
And the modern myths to uncover the forensic truths about Atari's boldest claim. To understand why Atari made the claim they did, we have to revisit the marketing battlefield of the early 1990s. This was the era of the bit wars. Sega and Nintendo were locked in a brutal conflict, with terms like 16-bit, blast processing, and Mode 7 graphics becoming the slogans that defined a generation. The number of bits was the primary metric of gaming power for consumers. As the 16-bit era matured, buzzing in the industry began about the next leap. Sega was touting its 32-bit Saturn, and Sony was entering the fray with their 32-bit PlayStation. Into this arena stepped a familiar but fading name, Atari. They needed a weapon that could not just compete, but dominate the conversation. Their strategy was audacious. While their competitors were talking 32-bit, Atari would leapfrog them entirely. Their weapon was the Jaguar, and their marketing was unequivocal. Do the math, 64 bits. This wasn't just a claim, it was a direct assault on the entire industry, an attempt to preempt and redefine the next generation before it even began, by using the most powerful number in their marketing playbook.
Whoa, what the?
16-bit versus 32-bit versus 64 bits. It's real, Bob, when you do the math.
And I have to say that as a teenager reading the gaming magazines in 1993, that do the math slogan was intoxicating.
This is far beyond anything else I've ever played before.
64 bits, baby.
It suggested a level of power so far beyond the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis that it felt like science fiction. And the thought of having a console with almost supercomputing power in your bedroom was a tantalizing promise. But this marketing created a phantom, an idealized version of the console that lived in our imaginations long before we ever plugged in a cartridge. The question of whether the Jaguar was truly 64-bit matters today because it speaks to the gap between marketing and reality, between the promise of technology and the practical challenges of engineering. It's a case study in how a single phrase can define a product's legacy for better or worse. As one contemporary review in Computer Gaming World put it, the Jaguar was a great machine in search of a developer and customer base, a sentiment that would haunt it throughout its short life. To find our answer, we need to look under the hood. The following technical breakdown is based on the most credible evidence I've researched online in various forums and technical documentation. It's also based on my own first-hand experience playing this console over the decades and my professional experience working in the technology industry. So if I've misstated anything in the following, then please drop a comment below to clarify. With all that said, the Atari Jaguar was not built around a single monolithic central processing unit. Instead, it was a complex and somewhat fragmented multi-processor architecture that Atari called the Jaguar engine. This engine consisted of several key components intended to work in parallel. The heart of the system and the source of most of the 64-bit claims are the two custom chips named Tom and Jerry. Tom is the graphics processing unit, or GPU. It handles the main video display. There's also a bit block transfer processor, better known as the blitter for short, which is, in simple terms, a true 64-bit component which moves data around in memory independent of the main CPU, typically used to perform graphics operations while leaving the CPU to perform other tasks. The blitter is actually part of the Tom chip and is dedicated circuitry used for that purpose. Also on board the Tom chip is the system's object processor, which is a fixed-function video processor that converts display lists into video output, such as sprites, scaling effects, and so forth. And yes, it also has true 64-bit internal registers. The Jaguar's Jerry chip is a digital signal processor, or DSP, that is responsible for sound and is also a 32-bit RISC processor. Now that we've touched on the bare metal hardware, here's where much of the misunderstanding about whether the console is 64-bit originates. Both Tom and Jerry were designed with 64-bit internal data paths and are accompanied by a 64-bit memory bus across the system. The Jaguar's data bus shuttles information around the system with a 64-bit throughput. Think of it as a 64-lane superhighway pumping game data around the different components of the system. As Jaguar designer John Matheson stated, Jaguar has a 64-bit memory interface to get a high bandwidth out of cheap RAM. Where the system needs to be 64-bit, then it is 64-bit. This was a genuine and impressive feat of engineering for 1993. It's also worth noting that in addition to Tom and Jerry, the system also included a third processor, the Motorola 68000. This was the same 16-bit CPU at the heart of the Sega Genesis. But in the Jaguar, it was intended as a mere coprocessor, a manager to handle I/O functions. Atari's own Leonard Tramiel suggested that developers should not use it. But due to the immature development tools provided by Atari and the steep learning curve of how to program on the console, many developers defaulted back to the familiar 68000 as the primary CPU, effectively bottlenecking the entire system and failing to tap into its most powerful features. So with our understanding of the Jaguar's technology, was it really a 64-bit console? I guess the answer depends entirely on your definition. If you define a console's bitness by the width of the internal data paths within its main processors, then yes, the Jaguar has a legitimate claim. The Tom and Jerry chips did operate on 64 bits internally. But this is a very specific, and I would argue, a very narrow definition that was far different from how bits were measured in the other more popular consoles of the day. By this measure, the Jaguar's claim becomes far shakier, and I remember how critics at the time ridiculed the math. For example, Electronic Gaming Monthly quipped that if Sega did the math for the Saturn the same way, it would be a 112-bit monster. And as we've discussed, the Jaguar's architecture was a hybrid. It had 64-bit elements bolted onto a system that also relied on 16 and 32-bit architecture. This created a fundamental confusion. Add to this the lack of software development tools and a console itself that was hampered by hardware bugs. It compounded the problem. Programmers were given a system with incredible potential on paper, but lacked the mature compilers and libraries needed to easily harness the parallel processing power of Tom and Jerry. The unfortunate result was that the 64-bit power often remained locked away. So in reality, the Jaguar was, in practice, a very powerful 32-bit machine with some 64-bit hardware features, struggling against consoles with more coherent and developer-friendly designs. And the ultimate proof, as they say, is in the pudding, or in this case, in the pixels on the screen. When we analyze the real-world performance of the Atari Jaguar, the gap between its theoretical power and its delivered output becomes clear. There were moments of brilliance. A game like Alien vs. Predator demonstrated the system's potential with its impressive graphics and tense gameplay, becoming the console's most successful early title. Tempest 2000 remains a masterpiece of visual design and fast-paced action. In the Jaguar port of Doom, seriously, it's brilliant. If you'd like to take a closer look at some of the Jaguar's best games, check out the links I've put in the description below. These titles are a great showcase of what happened when developers learned to speak the Jaguar's complex language, leveraging the Tom and Jerry chips directly and fully exploiting the system's intricacies. But for every Alien vs. Predator, there were a dozen games that looked and felt like slightly enhanced 16-bit titles. Early releases like Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy and Evolution Dino Dudes were panned for failing to leverage the hardware. The system's design contained several critical bottlenecks. The shared memory architecture meant that Tom, Jerry, and the 68000 were all fighting for access to the same memory pool, creating traffic jams. And the over-reliance on the slow 68000 as a main CPU by many developers crippled performance before a single line of game code was ever written. Additionally, the GPU, or Tom, was powerful, but it lacked a floating point calculation unit, making complex 3D math difficult. The console's design relied on developers having to perform floating point math in software, which was difficult and taxing to perform efficiently. As a side note, while the PlayStation also had the same constraint, it had much better software libraries available for developers to use, making this process much faster and easier. So despite what Atari's marketing told you, the 64-bit label failed to translate to commercial success because the console's raw power was so difficult to access consistently. Consumers saw games that did not live up to the breathtaking promise, and they voted with their wallets. So based on what we've uncovered in this deep dive, what is the definitive verdict? Technically, the Atari Jaguar contains 64-bit components. Its Tom and Jerry chips have 64-bit data paths, and its Blitter and object processor can process 64-bit instruction sets. In that very specific hardware-centric sense, Atari's claim was not a complete fabrication. But to frame the question about bits in a way that a casual gamer in 1993 would have understood, I can't deny that the Jaguar was not a real 64-bit console. Its actual performance aligned more closely with other 32-bit machines like the 32X or maybe the Saturn. And let's be real, you can't simply add up the bits of processors like 32 plus 32 equals 64. That logic doesn't even make any sense, because that would actually mean the Jaguar would be something more like a ridiculous 272 bits if you add up all the different components together. I mean, who wouldn't laugh at that absurdity? When I think of 64 bits, the unified 64-bit powerhouse like the NEC VR4300 CPU in the Nintendo 64 stands front and center, which is a true 64-bit console in every regard. But in the end, does the label even matter? For collectors and tech historians, the architectural nuances are fascinating. But for the legacy of the Jaguar, the 64-bit debate is a distraction from its true story. The Jaguar's place in history is that of a bold but flawed experiment. It was a console that championed parallel processing long before it became the standard. Its failure taught the industry critical lessons about the importance of developer relations, the need for robust software tools, and, most importantly, about presenting an honest message to gamers. The Jaguar was a glimpse of a future computing paradigm that was shackled by the business and technological realities of its time. It remains a monument to ambition, a cautionary tale about hype, and a treasure trove of what-if scenarios that continue to captivate us decades later. But that's just what I think. How does the Jaguar stack up to your favorite 32 and 64-bit consoles of the era? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let's get a proper, respectful debate going in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back into gaming history, hit that like button and subscribe for more retro gaming goodness. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Do the math, Bob. You'll remember that, won't you, Bob?
Yeah, I'll remember.
Then you'll also remember this. That was a 64-bit kiss. Thanks, Bob.
Remember that feeling? The crinkle of plastic wrap as you tore open a new game box. That moment of unlimited potential where anything was possible. For many of us in the 90s, the Atari Jaguar was the epicenter of that feeling. It promised a 64-bit revolution, a gateway to gaming worlds we'd only dreamed of. And sometimes it delivered. The palpable dread of Alien vs. Predator, the psychedelic neon sparks in Tempest 2000. We loved those games. We defended this console because we saw its potential. But today, we're not here to talk about potential. We're here to talk about the other side of the coin. The games that didn't just fail to live up to the hype. They failed at being functional video games. We're going beyond simple disappointment. Beyond the usual worst games lists you've probably seen 100 times. We're conducting a digital autopsy. We're going to dissect the specific design flaws, the baffling creative decisions, and the outright broken code that transformed these Jaguar cartridges from portals to adventure into, well, digital train wrecks. What exactly made certain Jaguar games not just bad, but genuinely, authentically unplayable? Before we get into it, if you've seen any of my videos on YouTube, it's clear that I give very favorable coverage to many of the great games for the Jaguar. Probably more so than anyone else on YouTube, and I'm proud of it. I personally loved this system, and I can't say enough good things about the handful of truly excellent Jaguar titles that stood out against the competition. That being said, I have to be objective that there were a number of truly atrocious games on the console as well. Despite the good intentions and best efforts of the developers who worked diligently to bring these games to life under difficult circumstances. So, in this light, let's begin our exploration. The Atari Jaguar arrived on the scene with thunderous and frequently repeated claim of being the first 64-bit console. It was a marketing masterstroke aimed directly at us, the gamers who had grown up with 8 and 16-bit systems, and were hungry for a revolutionary next leap in technology. The problem was, this 64-bit label was more of a clever technicality than a real-world performance guarantee. The Jaguar's architecture was a tangled web of multiple processors, a 16-bit CPU, a 32-bit GPU, and another 32-bit DSP, an object processor that aided in graphics rendering, and a blitter chip that pushed data around the system's architecture on a 64-bit bus. Getting all of these components to work in harmony was a Herculean task for developers, most of whom had inadequate tools, limited budgets, and faced a frantic rush to fill a launch library for a desperate company. This perfect storm of overhyped hardware, developmental complexity, and corporate pressure created a fertile breeding ground for a software catastrophe. The market was hungry for groundbreaking content, and Atari was willing to greenlight almost anything to get boxes on the shelves. This wasn't just a console that had bad games. It was a console that, by its very nature, was ripe for creating a special kind of awful. Games that were conceptually broken from the ground up. They weren't just poorly executed. They were misguided, unfinished, and in some cases, barely functional. Today, we're peering into that abyss. We're going to meet the games that define the Jaguar's legacy of failure, starting with the absolute worst of the worst. Welcome to the unplayable Hall of Shame. First up, a game that desperately wanted to be the Jaguar's killer app, its answer to Sega's Virtua Fighter. I'm talking about Fight for Life. On paper, a 3D fighting game was exactly what the system needed to showcase its supposed polygon-pushing power. In reality, Fight for Life is a masterclass in how to sabotage a good idea. The character models are blocky collections of polygons that animate with the grace of a stack of cardboard boxes falling down a staircase. The hit detection is a joke. You'll see your punches pass clean through the opponent's head with no effect, only to be telekinetically floored by a kick that was feet away. The controls are unresponsive, making the action on screen feel like a slog through a mud pit. This turns every match into a frustrating struggle against the interface itself. With its crudely texture-mapped graphics, it wanted to be Virtua Fighter 2, but it plays like a pre-alpha tech demo for a game that should have never been. And even to this day, I've tried playing it multiple times, and I swear, I still haven't even been able to finish one fight since each round is obscenely long, and it takes forever to actually close the distance with your opponent to engage in battle. I'm sorry. This game is a hollow, broken shell that unfortunately illustrates the gap between the Jaguar's theoretical power and the harsh reality of trying to harness it for a complex, fast-paced genre. I'd have been much happier if Atari just released a good port of Hit Fighter from the arcade instead, which would have been much better than this. At least that had digitized graphics that were still a step up from the cartoony visuals of Street Fighter back during this time. If Fight for Life was a failed attempt at high-concept glory, then Club Drive was a failure of basic competence. Marketed as a driving simulation game, Club Drive is more accurately described as a physics-defying slideshow. The graphics are so rudimentary, so stripped of detail, that the tracks feel like empty, low-polygon panes dropped into a soulless world. The controls are the real star of this disaster. Your vehicle handles with the precision of a lead bowling ball on an ice sheet. The slightest tap on the directional pad sends you careening off the track, and you'll spend the majority of your drive engaged in a futile, slow-motion struggle to point your car back in the right direction. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you consider that Atari had already released its hard driving in the arcades years earlier, a game with a solid and realistic and enjoyable driving model, and a more believable, if still blocky world. Club Drive feels like a regression back to the Stone Age of gaming. It's not challenging. It looks 8-bit. It's antagonistic. It doesn't test your skills. It tests your sanity and your will to live. Seriously, this quite possibly is the worst game in the Atari Jaguar's library. And then there's White Men Can't Jump. Yes, that movie from the mid-90s. In a move of breathtaking cynicism, someone decided this comedy about street basketball needed a video game adaptation, and what they produced is perhaps the most perfectly titled bad game of all time. Because the players in this game genuinely cannot jump, or run, or pass, or do much of anything that resembles basketball. The gameplay is so fundamentally flawed, it's almost impressive. Players clip through each other, the ball phases through the backboard, and the AI alternates between catatonic stillness to omniscient, unstoppable scoring. The comparison to the outstanding port of NBA Jam on the Jaguar is downright cruel. Where Jam was fast, fluid, and bursting with personality, White Men Can't Jump is a slow, broken, and utterly soul-destroying ordeal. It somehow managed to be worse than the film it's based on, and that, my friends, takes real effort. So these three games represent the peak of the Jaguar's failure, titles that are broken at the very core. But sometimes the unplayability isn't just the technical glitches, it's baked into the very design philosophy. So let's look at some games that are technically functional, but in my mind are conceptually disastrous. These are games that might technically work, but are so poorly conceived that they become a real chore to actually experience. Our first stop in this realm is the Jaguar's infamous pack-in title, Cybermorph. Yeah, I know. This one is going to be controversial, since this game certainly has its fans, and I'll admit it's not all bad. For many of us, this was our first taste of the Jaguar, and boy, as much as I was hyped up and wanted to like this, it was a real miss. Cybermorph was an early attempt at an open-world 3D flight shooter. The ambition was there, but the execution was a nightmare. The world was vast, empty, and a repetitive collection of samey landscapes in a neon void. The draw distance was so short that towering mountainsides would pop into existence mere seconds before you crashed into them. And then there was that voice. That condescending, digitized voice of your ship that would sneer, "Where did you learn to fly?" every time you dared to even scrape a polygon. It was a constant nagging reminder of your struggle against a hostile and unfinished game world. When you stack it up against other 3D flight simulators of the era, like FA-18E Super Hornet on the PC, which offered more complex missions and a coherent sense of space, Cybermorph feels like a clumsy, first-year programming project. It wasn't just a bad game, it was a terrible first impression for the entire console. Yeah, 2020 hindsight, right? Atari sadly bit off more than they could chew with using this as the pack-in title, and had they included Alien vs. Predator or even Tempest 2000 instead, it seems clear that it would have sold more systems. The silver lining here is that I'm happy to say that the follow-up title Battlemorph on the Jaguar CD fixed many of the fundamental problems of Cybermorph. It is actually a pretty good game in its own right. Now, if Cybermorph suffered from ambition, Trevor McFerrin, the Crescent Galaxy, suffered from a profound lack of it. In an era where the Super Nintendo was wowing us with the forward-scrolling 3D magic of Star Fox, Atari's best attempt to compete gave us an old-fashioned 2D side-scrolling shooter that felt years out of date. While the visuals were shiny, amazingly colorful, and looked high-res, the enemy designs were pretty generic. and the level design was punishing and repetitive. There was no real hook or no gimmick, no real spark of innovation, not even any in-game music. I mean, come on. Other than the eye-popping pre-rendered graphics that it used for sprites, it was a bland, by-the-numbers shooter that put players to sleep with its monotony. Compared to the thrill ride of Star Fox and even the underrated Sylpheed on the Sega CD, Trevor McFur wasn't just a disappointment. To me, it was a major embarrassment and honestly, a pathetic attempt that came nowhere even close to those other 16-bit titles that actually felt incredible to play. This one was a real letdown, and I have to say I got bitten by the hype, and it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth to this day. It's as if Atari wasn't serious about the type of games it was competing against and didn't understand the need to focus on innovating new game experiences, rather than just relying on their raw, theoretical bit count. I really wanted to like this game, but just no. Jumping back into the Jaguar's struggle with 3D, it was painfully evident in our next title, Checkered Flag. This was supposed to be the system's answer to Virtua Racing, a showcase of smooth polygonal speed. But what we got was a janky, stuttering mess. The frame rate was abysmal, often dipping into the single digits, making it nearly impossible to judge corners or react to other cars. I mean, I liked the fact that there was some car customization options and the ability to change the weather on different circuits. But the tracks themselves were barren and boring. The sense of speed just seemed off, and the controls were not very responsive. It was a poor man's 3D racer that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Jaguar's architecture was a nightmare, even for basic polygon rendering. Where Virtua Racing on the Genesis, a 16-bit console, used the SVP chip to deliver a recognizable and fun experience that was a reasonable facsimile of the arcade, Checkered Flag on the 64-bit Jaguar was a painful and somewhat nauseating attempt to bring racing games into the third dimension. And you just know we have to talk about Kasumi Ninja. After the release of Mortal Kombat in the arcade, the gaming world went through a seismic change. Every console needed a bloody and violent fighting game. The Jaguar's answer was this somewhat comical effort. While it featured some sharp, digitized sprites of the fighters, they were awkwardly animated and felt stiff to control, like 2D cardboard cutouts. While set against some really stunning photorealistic backgrounds, the controls were absurd, requiring contortions of the Jaguar's already cumbersome controller to pull off special moves that often wouldn't even register. Yeah, there was lots of red blood and some fatalities, which were still somewhat novel at the time, so it ticked that box. But one character, Angus, a stereotypical Scottish kilt-wearing fisticuffs brawler, had a special attack where he pulls up his skirt and launches a fart fireball. Yeah, really. It was a game that seemed to think sheer wackiness could compensate for a complete lack of polish and balance. Stacked against the brutal and precise action of Mortal Kombat, Kasumi Ninja was an utter joke, a fighting game that was demoralizing to play even with your most forgiving friends. But the Jaguar's identity crisis with 3D wasn't limited to clunky fighters and racing games. It extended to the world of sports, with a title that took the console's technical shortcomings and weaponized them into an experience that was genuinely horrible to endure. I'm talking about our final game in the Hall of Shame, the epically terrible Supercross 3D. On the surface, a motocross game seems like a perfect fit. The jumps, the dirt, the action. But Supercross 3D fails on every conceivable level, starting with its track design. The courses are impossibly, claustrophobically short in depth and with an ultra-narrow track. You're funneled into a tight, constricted ribbon of dirt with virtually no room to maneuver. This isn't a wide-open motocross track. It feels more like racing a dirt bike through a hallway. There's no room to build up speed, no strategic line to choose through a corner. You're simply trapped in a slow-moving conga line with the AI riders, all of you bumping against each other in a desperate, hopeless scramble. Oh, God help you if you need to turn. The combination of these bunched up narrow tracks and the game's unresponsive handling model is a recipe for constant frustration. But the true unforgivable sin of Supercross 3D is its use of invisible walls. Instead of a forgiving shoulder on the side of each circuit, the edges of the track are guarded by an invisible, instant-death force field. Merely brushing your handlebar against the edge of the track, a common occurrence given the lack of space, results in an immediate, jarring, and completely unrealistic crash sequence. Your rider is flung from the bike as if he's been hit by a sniper round, completely breaking any fragile sense of immersion the game had managed to build. And all of this is rendered in a slideshow. The frame rate is abysmally low, creating a stuttering, hot mess that makes it nearly impossible to time your jumps or react to the turns throughout the track and other riders in your field of view. It's not just visually poor, it's physically nauseating. The constant stutter and jarring crash sequences turn what should be an exciting race into a motion sickness-inducing chore, where 8-bit games like Excitebike on the NES mastered the feeling of fun decades earlier. Supercross 3D on the 64-bit Jaguar feels like a technical regression into a painful, unplayable void. It's the perfect storm of bad design that actually fights against the player. Was it ambitious for the Jaguar? Sure, I guess, but I would avoid this one like the plague. So what was the aftermath of this parade of digital horrors? The impact of these unplayable games wasn't just a few disappointed kids on Christmas morning. It was a direct contributor to the Jaguar's commercial collapse and Atari's ultimate final exit from the hardware market. Word of mouth is a powerful force, and for every person who experienced the brilliance of Rayman on the Jaguar, there were 5 others who had their time and money wasted by Club Drive or Fight for Life. These games eroded consumer trust, poisoned the well for third-party developers, and cemented the Jaguar's reputation as a wannabe console within the broader gaming consciousness. It became the console you bought for 2 or 3 good games and then watched gather dust. Yet, in a bizarre twist of fate, many of these terrible games have developed a surprising cult following. Today, they are remembered not just for their awfulness, but as fascinating artifacts. They're time capsules of ambition, hubris, and developmental struggles. There's a perverse joy in firing up Fight for Life with a friend and laughing at its robotic animation, or trying to conquer the impossible physics of Club Drive. They've become so bad they're good classics. Their failures are now a source of communal bonding and nostalgic irony for a small, dedicated group of us who still care about this flawed machine. And there are some real tangible lessons here for modern-day game developers. The Jaguar's failures teach us that raw power is nothing without the tools and the talent to harness it. They remind us that clever marketing slogans are meaningless if the product in the box doesn't deliver. They underscore the danger of rushing a game to market to meet a fiscal quarter rather than a quality standard. In an era of day-one patches and live service games that launch in broken states, the ghost of the Atari Jaguar looms large. It's a cautionary tale that biting off more than you can chew and failing to respect the player's time and intelligence is a surefire path to ruin. So the next time you pop in a classic like Alien vs. Predator and feel that rush of nostalgia, spare a thought for these digital ghosts. They're the shadow to the Jaguar's light, a stark reminder of what could have been and a permanent part of its complicated, fascinating, and ultimately tragic legacy. They were beyond bad. They were unforgettable. Alright, my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
You can't get a break. New Tempest 2000. Only on the Jaguar 64-bit by Atari. Do the math.
What if I told you that one of the biggest failures in gaming history is actually a success story in disguise? This console was buried, declared dead, and forgotten by almost everyone. But then, something incredible happened. This isn't just the story of a flop, it's the story of a phoenix rising from the ashes. Stick around until the end, because the second act is the story of redemption that you won't want to miss. This is the epic fall and the unlikely rise of the Atari Jaguar. Let's set the scene. It's 1993. The 16-bit war between Sega and Nintendo is raging. And from the sidelines, a fallen king of gaming tries to reclaim its throne. Atari, the name behind Pong and the 2600, was now a ghost of its former self. Their answer? The Jaguar, a console they boldly marketed as the world's first 64-bit system.
8 million colors. Plus, the Jaguar games are so intense because the Jaguar system delivers real-world, real-time gameplay.
Do the math, they said. And on paper, the math was impressive. Now, I'll be honest. I was one of the people who bought the hype. I saved up and got a Jaguar in the early 90s, and while everyone else was getting ready for the PlayStation, I was deep in the Jag's weird little library. And you know what? I loved it. I spent countless hours in the moody, terrifying corridors of Alien vs. Predator. I blasted my way through the psychedelic chaos of Tempest 2000. And I felt like a total badass piloting a giant stompy mech in Iron Soldier, and Doom on the Jaguar, by far the best home console version. Well, that is until the PlayStation port came around. I've actually got full gameplay videos of all 4 of these best Jaguar games here on the channel if you want to see why they hooked me. But here's the problem. For every one of these amazing gems, there were 10 games like this. The launch lineup was weak. The controller was a bulky, confusing mess, and the marketing felt really desperate.
Good enough? With the Atari Jaguar system, 64 bits, 3D graphics, and CD quality sound, how can you be satisfied with good enough? Do you think you're good enough to play me?
Yeah.
For most people, the math just didn't add up. Then came the final nail in the coffin, the PlayStation and Saturn, arriving in 1995, and they completely demolished the Jaguar with their real power and amazing games. By 1996, it was all over. Atari was gone, and it just broke my gaming heart that the Jaguar became a punchline and a joke, with only about 250,000 units sold worldwide. It was one of the most spectacular face plants in gaming history, and the interwebs is full of hate against this old system. I don't know, maybe some of it was deserved. Even as a Jaguar fanboy, I have to admit it, but it still stings and felt like the unceremonious end of something that should have turned out differently. And that should have been the end of the story. But this is where our story gets good, because Atari's fierce gaming feline didn't stay dead. No, it has 9 lives. Because then in 1999, a miracle happened. Hasbro, who at the time owned the Atari name, did something unbelievable. They released the Jaguar's rights to the public. Anyone could now develop for it. And that's when the fans stepped in to finish what Atari never could. And add to this, that as the years went by, the console's rarity and its underdog status made it a holy grail for retro gaming collectors. A dedicated community of programmers and fans refused to let the dream die. They started creating new games and are still doing so right now, today. And these aren't just simple demos. We're talking full, polished, physical cartridges with boxes and manuals. And the craziest part? These new homebrew games often look and play better than the originals. Why? Because these developers finally unlocked the Jaguar's true potential, driven out of their pure passion. Tools like the Skunk board and the Jaguar Game Drive made it easy to play this new library. The console even got featured in a compilation for modern gaming platforms titled Atari 50, the Anniversary Celebration, introducing it to a whole new generation. This really brought it full circle, and with what was once a symbol of failure is now a thriving niche, kept alive by nostalgia, crazy passion, and love for this interesting and remarkable system. I mean, just look at how the sentiment of videos about the Jaguar on YouTube have evolved over the years. From the angry video game nerds' hilarious roasting of the Jaguar from back in 2010, to the recent Let's save the Atari Jaguar video by Sega Lord X. I mean, heck, even many of the most popular videos on my own small channel are focused on the Jaguar, which is amazing given the breadth of different retro consoles and games available. Even retro gamers who don't have the original hardware can still enjoy the Jaguar's complete library to experience its highs and the lows for themselves, quickly and easily through emulation. Not so many years ago, finding a decent Jaguar emulator was tough, and now just Google Big Pimu and download this excellent emulator, and you'll be warped into the mid-1990s 64-bit gaming bliss in moments. For skeptics or fans of the Jaguar, I encourage you to give it a go and see what made it tick. I mean, when I stumbled across Big Pimu a couple of years ago and was able to rediscover all of the Jag's classic games again, it felt like being a kid on Christmas morning, opening the best present ever. So my heartfelt thanks goes out to Rich Whitehouse for his brilliant work creating it. So did the Jaguar win the console wars? Absolutely not. It was a disaster. But its legacy is so much more than that. It's a story about preservation and perseverance. It's about the gaming community, which saw the potential where a corporation only saw loss. It's proof that even the biggest failures can still find a purpose and a group of people who will value and support them. So the Jaguar's final chapter hasn't been written yet because its fans are still writing it, and me, honestly, I couldn't be happier. But what do you think? Did you own a Jaguar back in the day? What's your favorite original game or homebrew title? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this trip through gaming history, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and ring the bell so you won't miss what's next. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching and stay jagged. See you on the next one.